Hey guys, it's me, Omar from the Horror Highway, and welcome to the Kansas State Iceberg. It took a little while, but I tried my best. I feel like at this point we all know kind of the deal, I found the creepiest / darkest stuff I could find regarding to the state. I got this recommended off one of the other videos. I forget which one, but I got a screenshot of who recommended the state, which was Starbit. So make sure to comment down below to let me know which state you guys want me to do next, and like and subscribe and all that. Anyways, let's get to the iceberg. Tier 1. Bigfoot. I couldn't find a lot of personal stories about Bigfoot in Kansas, but there are reports. If you look at the Bigfoot Research Organization, there are a total of 49 sightings of Bigfoot. On that website as well, there's a map that shows areas where the sightings occurred. It seems that most sightings appear on the east side of the state, with the Sedgwick area seeming to have more sightings than the rest. There's also a story of a sighting of a Bigfoot near Cheney Lake around 2022. By a family. They first noticed the creature because they heard it wailing into the night. Trying to find the source of that wailing, they noticed a bipedal creature, and once the creature had noticed that it had been spotted, it ran away. There's a dashcam video of the encounter, but the quality is pretty bad. And since the quality is pretty low, a lot of people argue that it isn't actually Bigfoot. But what do you guys think? The video should be playing while I was explaining the story, so in my opinion, the quality is too low and it's too dark, so I'm not really sure what to think of it. The Beaman. It's a cryptid that resides in between Kansas and Missouri, but it's got a pretty famous story about it running around in Kansas City. So I just put it here in Kansas. The origin of the Beaman myth supposedly starts from a traveling circus that came into Kansas City. The story goes that the Beaman was brought by a circus in the 1900s, but on the way leaving from Kansas City, the train car that the circus used would derail, and the 12-foot gorilla, which looked like a cross between a gorilla and a man, would use that opportunity to escape out into the woods. Now it is believed that the Beaman that people see nowadays is actually the offspring of that 12-foot gorilla and wolves. Biologically, that really doesn't make any sense. I'm pretty sure that's not how that works, but this is a cryptid, so, magic and special mutated genes. Stories of sightings of the Beaman still appear every once in a while. Obviously, this time people describe it more as of a wolf gorilla. Usually it's in the woods in between Kansas and Missouri. Usually people will be fishing when they see it, or they'll be driving down the road. They'll look to the side off in their car and they'll see something kind of running in between the woods. Though some people believe the story is really just a sort of boogeyman for kids to make sure they don't run off into the woods and, get lost. Sinkhole Sam. Within McPherson County lied a lake called Inman Lake. Now, this lake would end up being drained. After being drained, it left sinkholes. Within the sinkholes was a creature that would soon be known as Sinkhole Sam. First being spotted by two people who were fishing in the sinkholes. They said they saw a 15-foot long, snake-like creature that was about as wide as a car tire. The common belief held within all those people who believe in Sam is that he actually lives in underground caverns under the sinkholes. A less common held belief between Sam believers is actually something called a Foopengurkle, which is an extinct Kansas giant snake-like animal. I kind of did more research trying to look into what a Foopengurkle really is, but to be honest, I can't really tell you, and the best thing I could say is what I found on the cryptid wiki, which basically said that people don't actually even know what that means. So yeah, that's why it's not really a common held belief for the people who believe in Sinkhole Sam. Another thing that people actually do when looking for Sinkhole Sam is to go to the biggest sinkhole called the Big Sinkhole and try to wait him out, see if he comes out, because that's where he was first spotted. So if you ever want to go see Sinkhole Sam, aim for the Big Sinkhole. Pterosaurs. Now, while pterosaurs did actually live in Kansas back before they went extinct, surprisingly, there's even sightings now of the dinosaur creatures. Now, why most people assume that it's pterosaurs they're seeing in the sky is simply because the wingspan that the witnesses are describing when they see the flying creature is something far too large for most modern animals. Accounts going on saying they've seen these reptile-like creatures with 25-foot wingspans. There's this blog called Live Pterosaur by Jonathan Wickham, and in it he documents modern-day pterosaur sightings, and on his blog he's claimed to have at least 14 sightings in Kansas. Though he's not the only one interested with these creatures, an author, K. Margie, has a book, Winged Aliens, a theory that winged cryptids are aliens and or interdimensional beings. In this book, she has some tales of people seeing pterosaurs. Usually, before the sighting, there's a strange light or weird sound happening. Some of the places that the pterosaurs were spotted in Kansas were Leavenworth County, Wyandotte County, and somewhere in central Kansas. Hellhounds. Now, these aren't really like giant dogs that are on fire or anything. Rather, it's more just to describe wolf sightings in Kansas. You see, in the state of Kansas, since 1905, the timber wolf has been extinct. And while coyotes still roam around in the state, the difference between a coyote and a wolf is extremely apparent, as wolves are typically 2 times the size of a coyote. So when someone in the state notices a wolf, they first guess it's not natural. Now, that's not to say all of these sightings are unnatural cryptid monsters. There have been cases where a wolf simply got lost and walked into Kansas, but for the most part, a sighting of a wolf for someone who lives in Kansas is extremely strange, to say the least. Now, where the hell part of these hellhounds come from is actually the fact that in Kansas, Stull, Kansas specifically, it's commonly known as one of the 7 gates of the hell in the US. So the main idea is if you see a wolf or a giant coyote dog with yellow eyes around this area, you're actually witnessing a hellhound. There's really not a lot of reported sightings of hellhounds online, but it's kind of like a common held belief that within that area, you might see them. Giant grasshoppers. Now, while Kansas did have a swarm of grasshoppers come in during 1875, by all accounts, those were just normal grasshoppers. Rather, this is a story that takes place around 1880s, supposedly. It was said that grasshoppers came down to Kansas, and that these grasshoppers weren't your normal ones, but rather, they were the size of mules, meaning that Kansas was swarmed with grasshoppers that were about 50 to 70 inches big. The story goes that they were eating all the livestock around with their huge mandibles, and hitting what they could with their antennae. They ate cows, pigs, and sheep, and when they were done eating them, they would go for the crops next, and when everything was eaten, they would clean their mouths on the barbed wire. People tried attacking them to defend their property, but it was a swarm of grasshoppers. So in the end, the efforts were kind of in vain. The Topeka Red Lights. On March 27, 1897, many people in Topeka, Kansas would notice something extremely strange in the sky. It was reported on the very next day by the Topeka Daily Capital. They claimed that this strange red light appeared in the western sky about 9:30 p.m. Another thing they reported, it was that at least 1,000 Topekans saw it at the same time, and that they all notified the newspaper's office. Some people said that the red light was a moving object, while others weren't too sure. What is known is that the light just suddenly disappeared without anyone knowing where it went or how it disappeared. For that reason, many people believe it to be a UFO, though it isn't really known, but that is the best guess. The Hamilton Incident. In the book, Kansas UFOs and Extraterrestrials by Carol Marsh, she writes about a sighting that occurred in 1897 near Yates Center, Kansas. Supposedly, a man saw a UFO near the farmhouse of a family known as the Hamilton family. The man who saw this UFO said he could see people inside the ship, meaning that the UFO must have had windows. Strangely enough, he also said he could hear them talking in a language he didn't know or understand. Unlike many modern UFO sightings, but similarly to the old ones, he said the ship was driven by a large propeller. Supposedly, the ship had some sort of spotlight, and it was shining this light over to the farmer, his son, and someone the farmer hired to help. This is the strangest part of the UFO sighting. Supposedly, the UFO dropped the rope, caught a calf in the rope, and dragged it up to the ship, and after that, it left. Now, the reason the entry is so high in the Iceberg is because actually was the fact that this ship matches the UFOs that many people were claiming to have seen that were proven to be hoaxes. From November 1876 to 1897, many people from California, Texas, and the Great Lakes states reported a craft extremely similar to this, powered by propellers, having giant lights. So to me, this seems like nothing but a hoax. And it's even within the time frame of when these hoaxes were most popular, 1876 to 1897. This event happened in 1897. Also, that hoax is considered to be the first large-scale UFO flap, widely reported in all contemporary media. So that's why the farmer might have said this, because he probably read it in some newspaper or something, and decided to get in on the fun. Also, what kind of UFO would pick up a cow with a rope? You have spacefaring technology, but no tractor beams or whatever, anti-gravity lifting stuff. Tier 2. The Deer Woman. Now, many Native American tribes that lived within Kansas, such as the Osage, Pawnee, Sioux, and Ponca, have a tale of a creature known as the Deer Woman. Now, whether the Deer Woman is bad or good, really hard to tell. The best way I could describe it is sort of like an ancient midwife. It would aid in the childbirth of pregnant women, and it would not harm the child in any way. It just made sure that the woman and the child both lived through the process. But at the same time, it was said that the Deer Woman would find adulterous and promiscuous men. It would lead them out into the woods and kill them. Now, it is believed that there isn't one Deer Woman, that it's sort of like a race of spirits. I'm guessing the story of the Deer Woman was sort of meant to keep couples together and make people afraid to cheat on their significant others and everything. Trying to build a stronger family unit. Though since this was a Native American legend, there's not many sightings or reports of it online. Hamburger Man. This is probably the more frightening cryptid/urban legend on this list, and it's pretty funny because the name is extremely goofy. So it is said on a rural and country road that you might encounter some being known as the Hamburger Man. His face is shrouded and covered, so no one can ever really tell what his face looks like, but it is known that he wears ragged and dirtied clothing, that his hands are bloody and skeletal, and on top of his ruined clothing, he wears an apron smeared with blood. People who have come across the Hamburger Man are immediately beset with fear and anxiety. Just being around him slowly drains you of your sanity. One of the most terrifying things about the Hamburger Man is from his namesake. It is said that with him, he carries hamburgers, but these aren't regular burgers. It is said that if you don't manage to get away from him, he'll kill you and turn your body into hamburger meat to offer to his next victim. As to the origins of the Hamburger Man, no one really knows, but most people believe it to be a story made to warn people of traveling alone at night on unknown country roads. Wendigo. Now, while most people would assume the Wendigo isn't really all over the states, usually situated up towards the northern part of the United States, towards the Canadian border, while doing some research, I found on a website quoting a book, the book being American Monsters by Linda Godfrey. And basically in this book, she did research on myths and monsters and cryptids and whatnot. And Linda Godfrey would find that certain tribes from Kansas did have a Wendigo sort of tale. So the tribes of the Chippewa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi all had their own versions of the Wendigo, and these are all tribes that had land in Kansas. The myth mainly remains the same. Someone who's gluttonous and greedy lets that evil take them over, and they lose their humanity in the process. In the same book, American Monsters, Linda Godfrey explains the slight differences that the Wendigo had between tribes. For instance, some of them believe that it was a 30 to 38 foot tall ice creature with antlers, and some others believe it to be more like a werewolf type of situation. Either way, the cannibalism and the constant hunger remains the through line between all the tales. One cool story that I found that might be about a Wendigo was on the website darkstories.org. It was posted by CPhilly100. He basically goes on to tell that he was on a ski lift with a U.S. Army veteran, and that veteran goes on to tell him about a time he was in Kansas, and that veteran and one of his friends were hiking through a specific part of Kansas. They were there to see an annual bird migration. The veteran's friend started hearing someone screaming. It sounded like a woman. At first the veteran couldn't hear it, but as they started quieting down to try to get a better listen, they realized all around them it was completely silent. And then the veteran could finally start hearing the screaming. Basically from that point they were on high alert, checking their back, looking at the tree line and everything. They noticed that the forest seemed more empty than usual, and again, sounds seemed to not be happening around them. They both camp out. They're both kind of prepared because they have guns. After they camp out and the night ends, the veteran's friend goes on to tell the veteran that he kept seeing something running in between the tree line, and they didn't really know what it was, but they both felt extremely uneasy, and the veteran goes on to describe that he kept having nightmares of being chased by someone or something. The veteran ends by basically saying he didn't know what it was, but it wasn't until the video game Until Dawn came out that he kind of like connected the dot that it might be a Wendigo. He also finds a book, American Monsters by Linda Godfrey, and that's when he just kind of goes like, yeah, this was a Wendigo. Though there is no real evidence to say it was. Again, it's just a story someone told on the internet. Headless Man. Another myth from the natives who lived in Kansas, specifically the Wichita tribe. While the other tribes had versions of this headless man, I wouldn't really say they were headless. In fact, one of them even has two faces. One isn't even a man. but I digress. The Wichita tribe believed the Headless Man would appear to people in times to warn them of something bad about to happen. The size of the beast isn't known. Some people say that it was just a normal-sized human without a head. Others say it was huge. Some assume it to be the size of an ogre, which would be like Bigfoot size, I'm assuming, because I don't know what the size of an ogre means. That's mainly because another version's tribe of the Headless Man is an ogre. And since the Headless Man is supposed to be a sign of horrible things to come, it is assumed that it also is a malevolent creature. General UFO information. So when it comes to Kansas, it ranks 26 out of the 51 territories that satellite internet ranked in UFO sightings per person. So basically right in the middle, with 39 people for every 100,000 saying they have seen a UFO, at least according to this data, which was gathered in 2023. And looking at the National UFO Reporting Center, Kansas has reported 1,188 sightings. Two-Face, also known as Double Face and Winyan Nupa. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. I couldn't really find a pronunciation guide for it, so I'm just gonna keep calling it Double Face, but that's also what it was originally called. When I mentioned earlier the No-Face Man, that was for the Wichita tribe. Some people believe that Two-Face is actually the Sui's No-Face Man. I don't know how you go from No-Face to Two-Face, but I digress. Two-Face is supposed to be a female ogre with one face in front and one face in the back. It's said that if the second face stares at you, you will get paralyzed, and Two-Face will eventually come and kill you. Now there are some other tales of the Two-Faces actually being a tribe, and there are both male and female members, but for this entry I'm just going to focus on the singular female ogre Two-Face. As I mentioned earlier, Two-Face is supposed to kill you if you see her second face, which is the one on the back of her head. But she doesn't just kill, she also likes mutilating, eating people, and is said to kidnap misbehaving children. One really interesting aspect of Double Face that I found online is the fact that the witch kind of works on Among Us rules. The witch will sneak into a tribe and try befriending a mother who had recently lost her child. However the reason, once a friendship is established, Double Face would reveal herself to be a witch/ogre. Once Double Face reveals who she is to the formerly pregnant woman, she will strike a deal with them. Double Face will offer some form of redemption, or maybe secretly coerce the other woman. But regardless, a ritual is then undertaken once the formerly pregnant woman accepts the deal. This ritual is meant to transfer Double Face's spirit into the body of this new woman. It is said that's how she prolongs her life. Of course, when she takes over the body, a face appears on the back of the head, and once again Double Face uses magic and clothes to cover herself and try to go into another tribe and try to find another pregnant woman who recently lost her child. 2006 Barbell UFO. In Wichita, Kansas, on November 24th, 2006, a man would be driving in his car when he noticed something strange in the sky. Two spheres, about 20 feet apart, connected by something in the middle. He would describe it as a barbell. The man believed the craft to be 35 feet above the ground. He described it as colorless, and something strange he also reported was the fact that his high beam headlights seemed to be absorbed by the craft. He only saw it for 6 seconds, but estimated it was going at least 175 miles per hour, based on his own speed of going 75 miles per hour. Tier 3. The Delphos UFO Landing. By some, the evidence left at this landing is said to be the most compelling UFO evidence ever. The story goes, a 16-year-old Ronald Johnson was working on his farm when suddenly, a mushroom-shaped object, covered in multicolored lights, started hovering only 25 yards away from him. The object was only 2 feet off the ground, and it would shortly take off after just waiting there for a bit. When it did, it blinded the 16-year-old with how bright it was. This happened on November 2nd, 1971, and something that UFO left behind was a burn mark on the ground. Though that wasn't the only thing the UFO left behind. Supposedly, around the burn marks was this weird, crusty thing that when Ronald Johnson's mother touched, made her fingers go numb. She tried rubbing it off on her leg, but that also made her legs go numb. Supposedly, she didn't go see a doctor for this, and the numbing effect lasted for about 2 weeks. Quickly, the family took pictures of the site and would go to the local news and, tell them the whole story and bring them to show them the evidence they had. In total, there were 4 people who have said that they witnessed the UFO. One was a deputy sheriff who saw it fly off. The other 3 were Ronald Johnson and his mom and dad. A UFO investigator named Ted Phillips would come down and take samples of the soil. By the time he came down, there was snow around the house, but strangely enough, you could still see the circle around the snow. After analyzing the soil, strange things were found to be in it. Firstly, the ring was resistant to water. The soil in the ring contained more calcium and soluble salts, and was also more acidic than the dirt around the ring. The strangest thing was that within the soil was an unidentified hydrocarbon. There was also this strange organic material composed of white crystal-like fibers. But soon, these fibers would be identified by Jacques Vallée as a fungus-like organism of the order Actinomycetes. For some people, this was enough evidence to show that there wasn't actually a UFO landing, because it is known that that type of fungus grows in a circle, and also is found to grow Basidiomycetes, which is a fungus known to be fluorescent under certain conditions, which just leaves this case very in the air. Did a random circle of fungus just start growing and that's what everyone saw? But then that wouldn't explain the 4 people who saw a UFO shoot up into the sky. In the end, it's up to you to decide whether this was actually a UFO case or not. Kansas cow mutilations. Now, there's more than one report of cow mutilations in Kansas, but I figured I'd just focus on this one, cause it's the one I could most easily find. And it talks about December 23rd, 1973, in which farmers, police, Kansas Bureau of Investigation would find 40 cows mutilated, all very close to US 81. And it wasn't just located in one place, this was from a bunch of counties around the area. This was reported on the Kansas City Times, and an archive of the text could be found online, and that's where I'm getting this info from. In the newspaper, it was reported that a lot of these cows that have been dying were mainly black cows, Angus cows, and that whatever was mutilating the cows wasn't really picking any specific sex, it was getting both the bulls and the heifers. Many of these animals would be found with their ears and nose removed from them, as well as butchered sex organs. The investigating parties didn't know who did this, but they'd assumed it might have been a cult or someone playing a prank. And obviously, since it's a cow mutilation, the default for most other people is aliens. 1972 UFO Kansas Flap. I don't know if it's officially considered a flap, but there were a lot of reported sightings in Kansas of UFOs during 1972. One of the primary locations was Dighton, Kansas. One of the most famous stories to come out of Dighton was when a red, orange, and white light started hovering over a patrol car. The person in the car, the chief of police, M.R. Shelton, soon began to chase the strange light. It was said that he managed to make it all the way to 100 miles per hour trying to catch the object, and even then, it would only run parallel to his car, or slightly ahead of it. Though he didn't actually believe it was a UFO, but instead some sort of military infrared project. Another story in Lane County, when a girl at the time was at a baseball game with her friends. They noticed a strange star in the sky. After a while, the star seemed to start dancing in the night sky, and that's when they knew it wasn't a star. On the way back from the baseball game, what the girl and her friends believed to be the star actually flew down in front of the car and hovered above it. They described it as an extremely bright light that was almost blinding. They were so afraid that they immediately just drove away, as almost as fast as the object came down in front of the car, it quickly left. On that same year, the girl's father, who owned a wheat farm, would encounter a crop circle, and supposedly, her brother would talk about seeing strange lights in the night sky all the time that year during summer. Another encounter that happened in 1972 was detailed in an article, At the UFO Capital of Kansas, a Celebration of the Weird and Wonderful by Max McCoy. He talked to a local historian named Jim Gray. That local historian claims to have had an experience in 1972 as well. On a summer night, he was driving his car with his wife, when all of a sudden, it was completely lit up by light. He looked to his wife and just kept seeing light everywhere. That's when he looked up and noticed that's where the light was coming from. But at the same time he started looking up, he noticed that the light began to recede. Those were just some of the various sightings that occurred during 1972 on the west side of Kansas. Supposedly, there were at least 40 more reported sightings that year. The Wichita, Kansas capsule-shaped UFO. During the 1967 UFO wave, on June 27th, a man would look up and see this strange capsule-shaped object described to be shining brightly and reflecting the sun off of it. The person who took the photo, Mr. Jefferson Viller, also described an extremely strange noise that flew behind the object. He happened to have a camera on him and managed to take pictures of the object. showing an object that most people nowadays would consider pill-shaped. The man who took the photo, Jefferson Viller, said that the object seemed to be flying at 1,500 to 2,000 feet above him. 1952, Pittsburg, Kansas UFO. On August 25th, 1952, William Squires, a staff of the radio station KOAM in Pittsburg, Kansas, would notice something on his way home. While in his car, going back to his house from his job, he saw something, a low hovering object with clearly defined windows, just 7 miles northeast of Pittsburg, Kansas. It seemed to be hovering over a wooded area. Squires would describe the object as if 2 turtle shells or 2 oval meat platters were put edge to edge. He also noticed at the rim of the 2 halves there were small propellers, and that the propellers were revolving at an extremely high speed. He estimated the object was about 75 feet long, 45 feet wide, and that it was a dull aluminum color. He could also see windows on the ship, and described seeing a human being through the window. He got on the side of the road, turned his car off, and began running towards the object. But as soon as he started getting close to it, the object suddenly flew off and into the air. Squires was convinced that aliens were not in control of this UFO, but rather that it was being piloted by humans. An investigation by the Air Force would look into the wooded area and would find that vegetation was disturbed. St. Mary's appearance. I say it's the St. Mary, but if you're in the Catholic faith, there's kind of like different regional variants of St. Mary. The one that appeared in Kansas, specifically Lewis, Kansas, is known as La Virgen de Guadalupe or Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, which just means the Virgin of Guadalupe or Our Lady of Guadalupe. And this is a form of St. Mary. She appeared to several people in Mexico in what are known as Marian apparitions, and around December 1531. Well, supposedly this happened again in 1996, this time in Lewis, Kansas, to a woman known as Maggie Hooligan, her husband, Thomas, her 2 children, Amalie and Thomas Jr., as well as several other family members. The story begins on December 12, 1996, which was the 465th anniversary of the image of La Virgen de Guadalupe materializing in Juan Diego's tilma in Mexico City. It just so happened that something would happen to Maggie on that night as well. After a night of working at her factory job, she made it back home at 12:45 a.m. and that's when she walked into her living room, where she saw a plaque of La Virgen de Guadalupe that she would pray to every night. And as she began praying, she noticed that tears would begin flowing from the eyes of the plaque. And by the way, I'm just gonna keep calling Our Lady of Guadalupe La Virgen de Guadalupe because that's just the way I raised, and I want to say La Virgen de Guadalupe. And then on December 13th, the same thing would happen, this time with friends, neighbors, and family all around witnessing, as well as a father from the local parish. They were all there because Maggie was being interviewed by the local newspaper. And around 11 a.m., that's when they all noticed the plaque beginning to cry, clear tears. This event was recorded, and one thing to note is that the tears soon began to become thick blood. This would again happen on December 15th, and supposedly wouldn't stop until Christmas Day, with people genuinely confused as to how this was all happening. That's when things began to escalate, when supposedly on December 30th, 1996, Maggie then started receiving messages from La Virgen de Guadalupe, and this first appeared while she was leading a rosary prayer, and as she was finishing the rosary with a group of people around her, she suddenly seemed to start speaking differently and in a different manner. People described it as very sweet and not in a way that Maggie would speak. As soon as the prayer ended, Maggie would faint and she would wake up with no memory of what just happened. Supposedly the message she received was to pray the rosary every day, help stop abortions and wars. Many other strange things would happen to Maggie. For instance, one day on January 10th, 1997, she would come home from work with pain in her chest, and she received a vision from the Virgin Mary in where she explained to her that pain came from hell and it was because of all the injustices and abortions happening in the world. 15 days later, Maggie would wake up finding blood under her eyes, and they took her to the emergency room, and the doctors were extremely confused because while blood appearing from your eye if you're injured is common, the doctor was confused because she wasn't injured and he had no explanation as to how or why she was bleeding from her eyes. Another time, Maggie, her sister, and her 2 kids were driving home from the grocery store when suddenly they saw a bright light in the sky. Maggie wants to approach it. Her sister's kind of apprehensive to everything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Maggie's out of the car and next to a bunch of cedar trees where an apparition of La Virgen de Guadalupe is there, and the entire family goes over to her because she was in the car and now she's not. They want to know what's going on. They're afraid that she might be injured, and they all supposedly witness an apparition of La Virgen de Guadalupe. There's a lot of things that go on. I just wanted to get like the first couple things out of the way. If you want to read the rest of the stuff that supposedly happened, of course there's a Google Doc down there with everything labeled and where I read this from. But basically, I'm just gonna like TLDR here. Soon Maggie started bleeding from her eyes more, from her forehead. The plaque kept bleeding constantly. Some days it wouldn't stop, and then there would be pauses in the days where it did bleed. On 9/11, the plaque began bleeding a lot. But obviously, you know why. At a certain point, Maggie also gains a stigmata, and it starts bleeding as well. And I'm just kind of gonna end it on this note. It was around 2001-2002 when at least the reported things happening around the statue and Maggie kind of like died down. I'm not too sure if they stopped completely, but that's where this article I got the information from ends her kind of like the miracles that happened around her. The Albino Woman. Supposedly roaming around Rochester Cemetery in North Topeka. There isn't much known about the Albino Woman. In an article I found about Topeka urban legends, they described the Albino Woman as having lived in a 2-story house near the Rochester Cemetery, and how there was always one man helping her out, giving her rides to the grocery store. But no one really knew her name, and only knew her as the Albino Woman due to how white her skin was and her pink eyes. No one even knows when she died. It's believed to have happened around 1965. It is said that after her death, that a lot of people began witnessing a white woman walking through the cemetery. Again, they described her exactly the same as the Albino Woman, pale and with pink eyes. She even talked to someone at one point. Sightings of her are still reported to this day, though sightings vary. Some people say she walks with a German Shepherd, others say she walks with poodles. But regardless, the sightings of her are plentiful and always basically the same thing. It's just her walking through the cemetery. They even warn kids on Halloween nights to stay away of the cemetery because the Albino Woman might show up. Witch's Grave. In Oakhill Cemetery, many apparitions and EVPs have been caught, supposedly mainly around 3:33 a.m. It's around that specific time that the paranormal activity in the cemetery reaches its peak, and the cause of all of this is supposed to be a witch's grave in the cemetery. Tier 4, Stull, Kansas, and the Gates of Hell. So, there's a couple legends around Stull. One is about how the devil appears twice a year in a cemetery in Stull. Another has to do with the Stull Church. It's said that if you climb down into the basement, you might eventually reach hell. The issue with this is, supposedly you have to climb your way back up out of hell, and doing so might take a couple of weeks. And if you actually get out, you're considered lucky, because usually most people get killed by the devil on their way back up. The 2 days the devil is supposed to appear in Stull is supposed to be Halloween and the spring equinox. The tale was originally through some sort of occult ritual, the devil was brought to the Stull cemetery. And as that sort of evil satanic energy kind of spread and that scared people, the tale also expanded. It expanded to the church, and then that's where the gateway of hell, climbing down into the basement, sort of began. There's another tale about Stull, specifically the cemetery yet again, that there was a hanging tree there, though this seems to not actually be true, and the story seems to stem from a tree that split a tombstone in two with one of its roots as it was growing. And people started saying the people in the graves were witches, and this tree was sort of like some sort of cursed, unnatural, haunted tree, and that slowly evolved into it being a hanging tree. While Stull seems to be not the most haunted place in Kansas, people's strong belief in it having this unnerving and strange energy is really present in all the writings about it. So, it's recommended as one of the places to visit if you really want to get spooked, especially on that spring equinox and Halloween. The Sallie House. Possibly one of the most famous haunted locations in all of Kansas. It's gotten a lot of attention from ghost hunting shows for its supposed haunting. The last time anyone lived in this house was in 1993. The story goes that a physician used to live in this house, and while he lived in the upstairs and the first floors served as his office space and examination rooms. Supposedly one day a mother would come in with her daughter, who had been in extreme pain. The mother would claim that the child was suffering from severe abdominal pain, and so the physician would assume it was an appendicitis. Based on his professional opinion, he thought the appendix would soon burst and needed to operate before the anesthesia could even take full effect on the girl. And so the story goes that he began performing and operating on the girl. All the while, she would just scream and scream, writhing in pain, and she unfortunately would not make it. The hauntings were made famous in 1993 when a young couple would rent the house out. They soon started noticing strange things, like how their dog seemed always agitated in the house. Things would begin turning on their own. Fires would break out in the house. and the husband soon began getting attacked. The husband would get scratched, get stuff thrown at him, and start getting bruised. But for whatever reason, the wife and the child of the young couple never seemed to be attacked. Soon, all of this would be brought to the attention of many paranormal investigators, and a lot of investigators would come. They would witness the equipment not functioning properly, batteries not working despite being completely new, see objects moving, experience the bruising and scratches, felt like they were being touched, and the operating room sometimes is extremely cold for no reason whatsoever. Many people believe it's Sallie who haunts the house, believing that in her last moments, she was being tortured by the doctor who was trying to save her. The Ghost of White Woman Creek. Yeah, that is actually what it's called. The reason for this name is tied into the tale of White Woman Creek. The tale starts with native Cheyenne people who attacked a western settlement and captured white men and women. 12 white settlers were captured, 10 men and 2 women, and after a while, people were allowed to leave if they wanted to, but most decided to stay. Among the captured was a woman who would soon be known as Anna Way. She gained this name because she fell in love with the chief of the tribe, and soon the two would have a son. However, among those who stayed, there was one man who desperately wanted to leave, and it said that after several months staying in the tribe, he had his opportunity, stole a horse, and made it all the way to Fort Wallace. There, he told the soldiers that everyone there was being held against their will, and led a group of soldiers to attack the Native American camp. In this attack, the chief and his son would be killed. It is said in response to this, Anna Way killed a soldier and kept fighting to defend the tribe, but in doing so, she soon would be killed as well. Though this isn't the only story for why it's called White Woman Creek, there's another story in which a group of homesteaders were raided by Native Americans, and in that raid they captured a woman along with several other people. The woman, seeing those other people being tortured, made an escape plan, and during the night she grabbed some rope, ran far away to a tree where she hung herself. Though there is another version, where the natives did wake up and were pursuing her, but in the process, she ran into a river, and that was the last they ever saw her. Since the late 1800s, there's stories that you could see a ghostly woman along the creek. This usually happens on nights where the moon is out. She's said to be running along the creek. Other times, she's said to be heard singing a Native American song. The Eldridge Hotel, first actually built as the Free State Hotel. It was built by people who supported the North, or the Union, or the United States of America, and was intended for those who supported the North to stay there. But on May 21st, 1856, pro-slavery forces would show up to the hotel, fire a cannon at it, and burn it to the ground. But a man who was living in the area, Colonel Eldridge, would build it again in 1857 with 3 of his brothers, and vowed that if it was ever destroyed again, they would rebuild it. And strangely enough, it happened again. Confederate forces in 1863 would once again destroy the building. They didn't just destroy the building though, they actually raided and looted the city the hotel was in, the city of Lawrence. But even after that, Colonel Eldridge would rebuild the hotel again, this time naming it the Hotel Eldridge. It wouldn't be until 1925 when the deterioration of the building had been too much and the city came in and rebuilt it. But it would close its doors in the 1960s and reopen in the 1970s into apartments. But then only 15 years later, in 1985, it would return as a hotel. And ever since 1985, that's when people started reporting the sightings of ghosts and spirits. There's said to be a ghost that haunts the elevator. Many people believe the 5th floor to be some sort of dimension to a spirit world because of how many apparitions appear to people. The heart of all of this seems to be room 506, where people witness lights turning on and off by themselves, doors shutting closed and opening, as well as breath marks appearing on clean mirrors, and the entire hotel seems to be riddled with cold spots. The Hutchinson Public Library, said to be haunted by the ghost of Ida Day Haltsfeld. It was a woman who over the years worked several times in the library, considered an extremely diligent worker and one of the best at the library. It doesn't surprise many that she would haunt the place, as she would spend a lot of her life working in that building. Oddly enough, when she passed away in 1953, that was going to be the first day of her new job at another library in California. She got in a car accident on the way to her new job, and ever since then, she supposedly haunts the Hutchinson Public Library. It's said that Ida stays in the basement, and that occasionally, the workers and visitors can hear footsteps in the basement, assuming it's Ida. Her apparition apparently reveals herself quite often, especially to the workers of the library, whether that be by speaking to them, or just appearing in front of them and then vanishing before their eyes. St. Jacob's Well. In a preservation known as Big Basin lies St. Jacob's Well, a pond that is, according to legend, bottomless. It's thought that if you enter the body of water, you're never gonna return. First used by the cowboys and Native Americans as a place to relax and drink water, it is now said that if you go to St. Jacob's Well, you'll see the apparition of a cowboy, and sometimes you might see several dead bodies floating within the well. Tier 5. The Thearosas Bridge, also known as the 109th Street Bridge and the Crybaby Bridge. Just 12 miles north of Wichita, Kansas, lays the town of Valley Center, where this bridge is located. There are several tales surrounding this bridge. One of them is Native Americans attacking settlers trying to cross the area. Supposedly, the natives took a child named Thearosa, and so the mother left the settlers' wagon trail and began seeking out the baby on her own. Supposedly, on her search, she would die on this bridge, and it's said that she haunts the bridge still looking for her baby, crying out for help. Another story that possibly explains the haunting talks about natives and settlers having a little fight around this area. Supposedly, a native woman would be stabbed, and she unfortunately would drop her child in the creek where the bridge is located. The child obviously didn't survive, and so it's said that the mother of the child haunts the bridge, trying to find her child. Another story for why this bridge might be haunted: a woman named Pterosaur who had an illegitimate child, and so she brings it to the bridge and drowns the baby. But later, feeling guilty for this, she would also go into the creek that the bridge goes over and drown herself. And lastly, the last possible story to explain the haunting is one of a woman who was engaged but fell in love with another man and had that man's child. Supposedly, once the fiancé discovered this, he took the baby to the bridge and threw it into the creek below. It is then said the mother, Thearosa, jumped from the bridge to try to save her child, and both died in the process. Many reports of balls of light, strange dark shapes, and, obviously, the apparition of a woman is said to happen on this bridge. There's supposedly a little ritual for summoning Thearosa. By claiming to have her child while on the bridge, it's said that she'll come out the water and attack you. Fort Dodge. Located in what is now Dodge City, the fort was established on April 10, 1865, and was meant to watch over and protect wagon trains going along the Santa Fe Trail, the New Mexico. The fort was built to protect mainly from two things: from dehydration and Native Americans, as the fort was on a dry route called the Jornada de Muerto, which means the journey of death. Over the years, there would be small skirmishes between Native Americans and those in the fort, such as in 1868, in which 4 soldiers would end up dying in a battle with the Comanche and the Kiowa. Not just that, but in the first year the fort was built, pneumonia, dysentery, diarrhea, and malaria were very common for those living inside the fort, and many would die from these diseases. Though thankfully, over time the Native American attacks would slowly stop, and in 1882 the fort would close down, and eventually by 1885 and in 1885 the land was open. The remaining buildings of Fort Dodge are said to be haunted by the soldiers who passed away during the time Fort Dodge was active. Fort Hays. Established on October 11, 1865, it was meant to protect military roads and construction of the Union Pacific Railroad from gangs, as well as defending travelers from Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho Native Americans. The current site of Fort Hays is not where the original Fort Hays was. In the spring of 1867, a flood would occur on the original place where Fort Hays was, and in that event, several Buffalo soldiers would end up dying. Shortly after, a new area was located, where the modern Fort Hays remains. This fort would house a lot of soldiers who were active in the Indian Wars. That being said, it's actually not the soldiers who are the most famous hauntings for this fort. Rather, it's a ghost, known as the Blue Light Lady, believed to be a woman named Elizabeth Polly, who would come to help and comfort soldiers who were dying due to a cholera outbreak that hit the fort. No one knows if she was actually a nurse, but she was there helping people regardless. Eventually, she contracted cholera as well, and would die, and she would be buried on Sentinel Hill near Fort Hays. But in 1905, when the fort was shut down, soldiers' bodies would be moved to Fort Leavenworth, and civilian bodies would be placed in the Hays City Cemetery. That's where Elizabeth's body was moved. The first sighting of Elizabeth was in 1917, when a man named John Schmidt reported seeing a woman in a blue dress walking towards Sentinel Hill. He began following her, but shortly thereafter, she disappeared. Then, in 1950, a patrolman claimed that he hit a woman in a blue dress, wearing a white bonnet with his patrol car, but when he got out to inspect what had happened, there was no one around, and there was no damage on the vehicle. This is where she got the name the Blue Light Lady. She seems to emanate a blue glow coming from the dress, and many people say that you could still see her walking towards Sentinel Hill. She seems to be walking to her gravesite, which is now known as the Lonely Grave. LeHunt, Kansas. This ghost town started as just to support the Kansas Portland Cement Company building that was there. The cement producing building was successful, and as more money kept being made, the town around it slowly started building itself. The town being named after the president of the Hunt Engineering Company of Michigan, LeHunt. Though unfortunately, as technology advanced, the cement producing building would slowly start losing more and more money, as it was only built in that area because of the amounts of material that helped produce cement. But as railroads and transportation got better, the need to build closer to where the cement materials were became less, and also because more and more businesses were starting to produce cement, which led to an overproduction of cement. More money would be bled, and eventually the cement producing building would be shut down, though it would be reopened by a different company. And during that time, 3 people would be burned due to an explosion that occurred on March 25th, 1913. Though that wouldn't shut down the building permanently, as after World War I, need for cement grew, and so LeHunt saw a second resurgence. But that was also short-lived, and after 1918, it would become part of the United States Steel Corporation, and the building would essentially be gutted, and everything inside it would be sold, basically marking the end for the town of LeHunt. There was an old cemetery in the town called the LeHunt Cemetery, and this is where the haunting supposedly happens. It is said that a worker named Bohr died in a tragic accident at the plant, that accident being that he fell into a vat of concrete, and his body was not able to be recovered. It's said that you could still hear him walking and see him, and if you're lucky, you might see an apparition. Hollenberg Station. Built in 1857 by Garrett H. Hollenberg, it was meant to be a stop for the Pony Express, and is the only Pony Express building still standing in its original location. And if you're wondering what the Pony Express was, it was basically a way to deliver mail faster than how mail was being delivered at the time, by having one dude just constantly switch horses every 10 to 15 miles trying to cover 75 to 100 miles of land. It failed because it essentially never got a contract with the government, and the people who made it lost a bunch of money doing it, as well as the Pony Express mail carriers going to places where the mail was not going. Regardless, the Pony Express business only lasted about 18 months, and even after the business was shut down, for some reason, people just kept the station up. There was a town built next to it, so they slowly just kept with the upkeep of the building. Though eventually over time, people did stop caring, and it's slowly been deteriorating ever since. However, many people believe it to be haunted. They say that the pony riders that made a stop here occasionally come back from the grave, and that you could see apparitions and hear hoofs, as well as other noises, just as young men calling out for the station, despite no one being where the sound's coming from. It is said that going inside the station, you're gonna be met with many of gold spots and some really strange sounds that have no explanations. Tier 6. The 1875 Swarm of Locusts. This time they're regular sized. These swarm of locusts originated from the Rocky Mountain areas and had been laying around the Rocky Mountains since 1874. It just wasn't till July 1875 when they finally made their move on Kansas, which was extremely hard on the people who had just moved there, which was a lot, as a lot of people had just planted the crops not too long ago and they were finally seeing some growth. But then the state got hit with a drought, which is what caused the locusts to appear. The swarm was so big, it said that it blocked out the sun. Many farmers tried covering their plants with cloth and fabric, but all this did was slow down the locusts as they just began eating through that to get to the crops. And when all the crops were gone, the locusts didn't stop eating. They would move on to people's clothes, sheep, paper, tree bark, sawdust, leather, even wooden tools. A visit from the locusts would usually last about 2 days to a week, and by the time the locusts were done feasting, everything would be laid barren. As I said earlier, a lot of people had just moved to Kansas and had barely started farming, so they already lost the food they had just planted, and so many people went starving. And unfortunately, many forms of transportation were down, as grasshopper swarms covered the railroad tracks, not letting the train get any traction to go anywhere. This led to many families starving to death. Failed terrorist bombing in Garden City. In 2016, 3 men, Gavin Wright, Patrick Stein, and Curtis Allen, conspired to bomb a mosque of Muslim Somali refugees in the town of Garden City, Kansas. there was actually 4 men involved, but one was actually an undercover FBI agent, that man being Dan Day. Their excuse for their attempted mass homicide was their racism, as they saw all the refugees there as terrorists who were threatening their American way. The FBI agent, Dan Day, would end up staying undercover with the other 3 men for about 8 months, gathering enough evidence to make sure they would go away for a long time. The men's plan was to gather 4 different vehicles, fill it with explosives, and parking them at each corner of the apartment complex, in order to make sure the building was completely destroyed. But thankfully the plan would be thwarted before it was enacted upon. Of the 3 men, Curtis Allen would be sentenced to 25 years, Gavin Wright would be sentenced to 26 years, and Patrick Stein would be sentenced to 30 years, all in prison. The Battle of Mine Creek. On October 25, 1864, Union forces would overtake a retreating Confederate cavalry led by Major General Sterling Price. The Union brigades of Colonel Frederick Benton and Colonel John Phillips would engage 7,000 Confederate troops trying to get their 500-wagon supply train to cross a rain-swollen road. As the supply train was stuck, the Confederates were forced to form a line till they could get the wagon moving again. The Union side, only having 2,500 troops, still managed to successfully surround the Confederate troops, forcing at least a surrender of 1,000 men, and pushing the Confederate troops further back. The Confederates would try to re-engage the Union army a few hours later at Marmaton River, but were unsuccessful, and yet again were pushed further south, forcing Major General Sterling Price to end his attempted occupation of Kansas, and forcing his Missouri campaign to end. This is the largest Civil War battle fought in Kansas, with a total of 9,500 troops engaged, and an estimated casualty of 1,300, 100 Union and 1,200 Confederate. Massacre at Fort Baxter. On April 6, 1863, a General James G. Blunt was making his way towards Fort Blair, which was the official name for Fort Baxter. On his way there, he noticed something. At first, he believed they were Union troops from the fort, just doing their exercises, but when he sent his scouts out, they would come back and let him know that they were actually Confederates. Realizing that Fort Baxter was under siege, General Blunt would engage the troops outside the fort. Unfortunately for Blunt, the forces, led by William Quantrill, numbered at least 400. Meanwhile, all Blunt had was at least 100 men. And, unfortunately for Blunt as well, inside the fort, they were undermanned, as just 2 days earlier, 60 men were sent out to forage for materials, leaving only 90 to man the fort. This battle would end in a Confederate victory, with General Blunt having at least 85 casualties, and at least 6 men from the fort being killed. On the Confederate side, it's not known how many were lost, but it's estimated to be from 20 to 30. It is written in a book by Wiley Britton called Civil War on the Border. Many of the Union troops in the battle were told by Confederate forces that if they surrendered, they would be treated as prisoners of war, but what actually ended up happening was when they surrendered, they would end up being killed. Blunt would be temporarily dismissed of his command after this battle, as he was one of the 15 of his own troops who managed to get away. And after the Civil War ended, the fort would be abandoned, and the town of Baxter Springs would be built around it. Congress would end up appropriating funds for a national cemetery to be built around Baxter Springs, where those who fell in the battle would be buried. Tier 7. The Hyatt Regency Skywalk Disaster. July 17, 1981 lives in infamy in Kansas City. On that day, a tea dance party was being hosted at the hotel, with about 1,500 people gathered on the first floor. Something devastating would happen. The 4th floor skywalk would collapse, falling onto the 2nd floor skywalk, causing both skywalks to crash into the ground floor, leaving 200 people injured and killing 114 people. This being Kansas's deadliest structural collapse. During the investigation of what could have caused this, it was determined by the courts and experts that there were fatal engineering design errors. It seems that a design change was the cause of this, as initially, the 2nd floor and 4th floor skywalks were both going to be supported by steel hanger rods connected from the ceiling, but that would end up being changed. Instead, they made the 2nd floor bridge hang from the 4th floor bridge, making that connection from the 4th floor bridge double its load. This meant the connection was only capable of withstanding only an estimated 30% of the mandated minimum, at least according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. Udall tornado. On May 25th, 1955, the deadliest tornado in Kansas would hit, nearly destroying the town of Udall. An F5 tornado would end up injuring over 200 people and killing 80, and in total, causing the city of Udall $2.2 million in damages. The Potawatomi Trail of Death. In the early 19th century, the Potawatomi had 4 communities. The Potawatomi had signed a treaty that protected the land that 4 different communities of Potawatomi held. This was in northern Indiana and Michigan, but as the urge to keep expanding kept growing, the federal government would make offers to the 4 different communities in order to take that land, promising them more land in the west. Out of the 4 communities, 3 chiefs decided to take the deal, but one didn't. The community led by Chief Menominee. He refused to sell his land, and so the government went behind his back and made deals with other people within the community, forcing the sale of the land. The land was sold in the Treaty of Tippecanoe in 1832, but Chief Menominee still refused to move. Eventually, more and more settlers kept going into the Potawatomi lands. This would all come to a head on August 1838, when violence between the natives and the settlers broke out, and the Indiana governor would arrest Chief Menominee. On September 4, 1838, a militia would remove 859 Potawatomi people at gunpoint, forcing them to journey over 600 miles all the way to Kansas. It wouldn't be until November 4, 1838, till the trek known as the Potawatomi Trail of Death finally finished. A 2-month journey on foot, in which the Potawatomi people were given very little time to prepare for, and so they had very little food for the journey, and were not prepared for the elements. Many were exposed to typhoid. The march would claim the lives of 42 people, with half of those being children. Of the 859 forced to move, the first 756 would make it to Osawatomie in Miami County, Kansas. They made it there at the start of winter, only to encounter no shelter whatsoever. Luckily for the Potawatomi, the Catholic Church had just established a mission in Lynn County not too far away, and many moved over there. The Frontenac Mine Disaster. On November 9, 1888, an explosion would occur at Mine Number 2, an explosion so powerful that it broke the windows in nearby houses. When the explosion initially happened, it was believed that at minimum 100 people had died, but as rescue efforts began and people were saved, it was found that a total of 44 men and boys were killed in that explosion, making it the largest mine disaster in Kansas history. It was believed that there were 8 children within the mine, 6 teenagers and 2 13-year-olds. It is believed that the explosion was caused by ignited coal dust, which happened when the worker placed some explosive charges and lit the fuses. He placed some explosive charges on the wall and lit them, igniting nearby coal dust, which then caused a powder keg he had on him to explode, which led to a domino of other explosions, which led to a bigger explosion that filled other areas around him, which also had powder kegs. It's estimated that at least 4 or 5 other powder kegs also exploded. Those who died were either sent to St. Mary's or Mount Olive Cemetery, where they would be put to rest. Fidelity No. 9 Mine Disaster. On December 14, 1916, an explosion would occur in Meyer Mine No. 9. It is believed a combination of gas and powder explosion is the cause of this disaster. The explosion would end up killing 20 miners and injuring 7. Of those who died and were injured, many of them were badly burned, and almost all of them were breathing toxic gases from the explosion. Wichita Airplane Crash 1965. On April 16, 1965, at 9:27 a.m., from Wichita's McConnell Air Force Base, a KC-135 Air Force refueling tanker would take off. Its purpose was to refuel a B-52 bomber, but it would never achieve that. Rather, this airplane would only stay in the sky for about 4 minutes. As soon as it was obvious to the pilots that the plane was not making it into the sky, they started jettisoning all the fuel they had. They did what they could to try to make what was about to happen not be the worst it could possibly be. The plane would end up nosediving in a vacant lot. The impact would leave a crater that was 15 feet deep and would spread 32,000 gallons of jet fuel. This would cause dozens of homes to be burned and destroyed. In total, 30 people would die to the destruction caused by this airplane crash. 7 were crew members of the airplane, and 23 would be families who just lived in the neighborhood that got caught in the crossfire, who were just enjoying a Saturday morning. Thankfully, the fire crews would have the fires started by the airplane crash put out within the hour, and 10 months later, after an investigation, it was found that the cause of the crash was a rudder control system malfunction. This means that the airplane crew try all that they might, could have never prevented the crash. Another disheartening fact about this crash was the way the government compensated the families who lost property and other family members. It is said the families earned more money from loss of property than they did from the loss of their loved ones, with one family reporting they only got $400 for the loss of a child, and another family only got $700 for the death of an adult. The survivors would get settlements from the government, but what they got averaged less than $13,000, and many people believe the cause of this was the fact that the plane crashed into a black neighborhood, and mainly black families were affected by this disaster. The 1951 Great Flood started because of extreme rain over the months of May, June, and July. This flood would affect areas of Kansas and Missouri. This would lead to many rivers overflowing several times within those months. For instance, the Kansas River would flood from June 9th to the 10th, and yet again on June 22nd all the way to July 3rd. But the worst of the flooding happened on July 13th, 1951, as areas in Kansas like Manhattan and Fort Riley would see water stand at 8 feet deep within the business districts. Eventually, the flood crested so high that the levees would break, and about 256 million gallons of water per minute would flow into the city, destroying large portions of the city. In the end, 28 lives were lost, and nearly $1 billion worth of damage would happen because of the flooding. 2007 Greensburg Tornado. On May 4th, 2007, a 1.7 mile wide EF5 tornado would strike the town of Greensburg. With an estimated winds of 205 miles per hour, the tornado would touch down and travel for 28.8 miles, just lasting about an hour. It was estimated that the tornado wiped out 95% of Greensburg and ended up causing $250 million in damages. The tornado would leave 63 injured and kill 11 people. The January 4th ice storm. Starting on the 4th and lasting all the way through the 5th of January 2005, this ice storm would affect nearly all of Kansas and brought with it about 2.5 inches of snow wherever it hit. Roads and highways were filled with stumps and tree branches caused by the intense storm. Many towns and cities were affected with power outages, many taking up to 2 weeks to fix, and 56 counties were declared disaster areas. The storm was estimated to have caused at least $72 million worth of damages and claimed 4 lives. Tier 8. The Bloody Benders. In 1870, a family of spiritualists would settle in Cherryvale, Kansas. This family was one of 5 spiritualist families known as the Benders, made up of 4 people: John Bender Sr., his wife, Almira, his son, John Jr., and daughter, Kate. Upon settling on the land, they would build a cabin, a barn, a corral, and dug a well. Within the cabin, there would be large canvases placed to create separate rooms, and the cabin would soon function as a small inn because the Benders settled along the Osage Mission Independence Trail, so they would allow people who were traveling to rest and buy groceries, as they would also sell the stuff they produced on the land. The main idea was just to have a safe resting place for travelers. Again, the family were spiritualists, and the 2 people who claimed to have the psychic spiritual powers were Ma Bender and Kate Bender. Obviously, this kind of alienated them from their community, but to make things worse, John Bender Sr. and Ma Bender were very much seen as strange people by those in the community. For one, people were scared of Ma Bender. They said she was a she-devil, just kind of like intimidated by her. John Bender Sr. seemed to not talk to people a lot and had a very wild and unkempt kind of appearance, so people were just sort of put off by him. The 2 people that did mainly interact with the community was John Bender Jr. and Kate Bender. And John Bender Jr. was sort of not seen as an intelligent person because people would witness him just laughing randomly and sort of just zoning out, so people assumed he might have been challenged in a way. And so mainly Kate Bender was seen as the person to talk to, and she was described as pretty much excelling in social interaction. And in excelling in social interaction, she was able to sell her self-proclaimed spiritual powers, which were healing powers, psychic powers. She was able to conduct seances, and she gave lectures on spiritualism. So that store and inn opens in 1871, and for 2 years, the Benders would go on doing what you suspect them to do. I mean, they're called the Bloody Benders. They killed people. It wouldn't be until the spring of 1873 when people started noticing the frequency of people missing along this trail, and people started investigating, and the town kind of had this town meeting where they were like, okay, something's going on, we gotta investigate the houses. And the people start volunteering to have their houses investigated to clear their own names, but the Benders stayed quiet this entire time. It wouldn't be until several days later when the neighbors of the Benders noticed that the house looked abandoned, that the animals were unfed, and that there was like no sign of life anywhere. So a group of people come together, they go into the cabin, they start investigating, and yeah, everything's packed up, the food's gone, the clothes are gone, and the Benders have just left. Upon investigating the cabin, they notice the cellar door that was shut with nails. They go and open it, and what they end up finding is a 6-foot deep hole filled with clotted blood and the smell of death. But there were no bodies in the hole. Obviously the town finds the cellar, everyone springs into action. The cabin's actually like lifted up and deconstructed to find any evidence. Upon investigating the land, they start looking for freshly dug holes. They do end up finding dead bodies. They find 10 dead bodies buried on the land. Of the 10 bodies found, 2 were female, 1 was of an adult female, and 1 was of a young child. And upon investigating the young child's body, it is believed that she was actually just buried alive, and that's the cause of her death. And there were actually 4 other bodies found in Drum Creek, which is assumed that the Benders also buried those. Again, all those but the little girl were found with head injuries, or their skulls were sort of like cracked, and it also became apparent that their throats were slit. With the discovery of this, another discovery was found about the Benders, and that was that they weren't actually a family. Well, 2 of them were. That was Ma Bender and Kate. Kate was the actual daughter of Ma Bender, but the other members of the family were not actually related. In fact, they weren't actually even the Benders. The dad was actually a man named John Finklinger, and it is believed that he committed suicide in 1884, or that Ma and Kate had actually found and killed him because he tried fleeing with everything that they'd stolen from the victims. That's something I forgot to mention. When they killed people, they stole from them, but the reason for them killing isn't believed to be theft, because sometimes these people were found with stuff still on them. So it is believed that these people were killed solely for the Benders' entertainment. Ma Bender was a woman actually named Elmira Merrick, and Kate was actually called Kate, but John Finklinger wasn't her dad. It was actually a man named George Griffith, who strangely enough died with a resembling dent to his head as those victims found in the Bender property. And stranger yet was the fact that Elmira, aka Ma Bender, would marry 3 other men, and it was reported that she killed all 3 of her husbands and her other children so they would not testify against her in regards to her murdering her husbands. And lastly, the son, John Jr., was actually a man named John Gebhardt, and that his aloofness and laughing to himself was actually supposed to be an act meant to disarm people and make him think that he's just kind of like slow and stupid. It was also believed that Kate and John were in a relationship, at least in some form of one. Now into how they killed all these people. As I mentioned previously, they were all found with dents in their heads and their throats slit. Supposedly, what is believed to have happened is Kate and Ma Bender would perform psychic abilities to the people staying in their inn as a form of distraction. And earlier, if you remember, I mentioned how they used canvases to separate the cabin. John and Pa Bender were behind the canvases with a hammer and a knife, and while the people who were staying at the inn were distracted by Ma and Kate Bender, Pa Bender and John Bender would jump in and kill the victim. I gotta wrap this up because this is getting really long, but basically let's go back. As I mentioned earlier, neighbors saw that there was no sign of life in the cabins. They went, they investigated, they uncovered all of this. The only one whose fate is actually known, again, is the dad, who is assumed to have died from suicide or killed by the other family members. The other 3, not known what happened. What is known is that they took trains leaving the state. At some point, Ma and Pa Bender separated and went north, while Kate and John Jr. kept heading towards Texas and New Mexico, and the trail was eventually lost. Many people would claim to have killed them, but there's never been any substantial evidence to say that they were killed by these people. It is known that John Jr. went to outlaw country. As for the fate of Kate and Ma Bender, it's not actually known. Supposedly, the Bender property is extremely haunted. It is said that you could hear the wailings of people who have died, and it is also said that Kate Bender has been forced to haunt the property or has returned to haunt the property in some form. And it should be noted, as I said earlier, the neighbors basically tore down the cabin. The tale gained so much infamy that a replica of the cabin was recreated, and there's a decent amount more. I tried my best to condense this, but as you can see, it still ended up being pretty long. Edward James Adams, also known as Eddie Adams. He's one of Kansas' most notorious killers, known as the killer of the Prohibition era. In just 2 years, he would kill 7 people, 3 of which were policemen, and in that process, wounded dozens of others. His troubles with the laws would begin around the 1900s when he met a bootlegger named John Callahan and found the illegal business as appealing. He would also get married while bootlegging, but once his wife found out what he was doing, she would quickly leave him. Some other things he would do were petty robberies and car theft. It was after his wife left him, he would start beginning to form a gang in order to commit bank train robberies throughout Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa. On September 5th, 1920, Edward and his gang would try to rob an illegal gambling ring. That wouldn't go well, and a shootout would begin, in which 1 gambler and 1 gunman would die. Adams and his gang were unsuccessful, and Adams would be sentenced to life in prison, but the gang members around him only got 5 years. But that didn't matter to Adams, because he would manage to escape while in transport to the Missouri State Prison, simply by jumping off the train he was being transported in. Just shortly after that, him and another man would then rob a bank, and by shortly I mean like a couple of days. And then 6 days later, on February 17th, 1921, he would be convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 10 to 30 years in Kansas State Prison and life sentence in Missouri for murder. Again, that didn't matter to Adams because on August 13th, he would manage to escape from the prison. He did this by sabotaging the power in the prison and climbing a prison wall while the power was down. Though he wasn't the only one to get away from the prison, as 3 other inmates helped him get out, and they all had a getaway car ready to leave. Then Adams would form a new gang, in which he managed to steal $10,000 from 4 different banks, and in the process of stealing from one of the banks, would kill an old man by fracturing his skull. After more and more thefts, more shootouts, and more deaths, Eddie's gang would eventually finally meet their match. On November 20th, Eddie and a group of his friends were racing against another car when 2 motorcycle cops would catch them doing this and try to pull them over, but as they approached the vehicle, Eddie and his gang would shoot at the policeman, killing 1. Then they would speed off, driving as far as they can until they ran out of gas, and then would try to steal another car. In the process of doing this, Edward Adams would shoot the man he was stealing the car from because the man refused to give it up. With that car they stole, they would make their way back to Wichita, which is where they were racing, and after managing to get away from the 2 motorcycle cops, they dropped off a bunch of their friends, and in the end it was just Edward Adams and 1 other of his associates. Well, they both went back to one of the gang members' house, only to find 2 policemen. And as soon as Edward Adams noticed this, a shootout began immediately, and Edward Adams and his friend would escape. Then 2 days later, Adams would try to rent a car, but the business owner noticed him immediately and alerted the police. And soon, a detective and 2 officers showed up. Edward Adams knew what was going on and drew his gun immediately, but the detective and the business owner would try to stop him from shooting his gun. But in the struggle, Edward would let out shots, and it would end up killing the detective. Once free, he would then start shooting at the policeman and would manage to strike 1 of them, but the 3rd policeman, taking cover behind a pillar, would be able to successfully shoot him and finally kill him. Edward Adams' body would be put on display in the city undertaking parlor, where more than 9,000 people would view his body. Dennis Rader, aka BTK. From 1974 to 1991, Wichita, Kansas would be terrorized by a killer known as BTK for his method of slaying people, which was binding, torturing, and killing victims. Dennis Rader would manage to stay under the radar by living a double life, one as BTK and the other as Dennis Rader, just a family man who worked for ADT Security Services, a former US Air Force who had a wife and 2 kids. As I said earlier, there were 10 known victims. In his first known slaying, on January 15, 1974, Dennis Rader would strangle 4 members of a family, leaving the bodies to be found by the surviving family member, a 15-year-old kid. And then, on April 4, 1974, he would stab and strangle a woman, killing her, and also shoot her brother, but he would manage to survive, and was able to describe what Dennis Rader looked like, calling him an average-sized guy with a bushy mustache and psychotic eyes. It was in October 1974 when Rader would decide to taunt the police by putting a note in a public library book in which he would describe himself and basically gave himself his killer name. He also taunted the police, saying that there would be a victim soon. By this point, the police knew that the man who strangled the family derived some sort of sexual pleasure from killing people. The main evidence for this being the fact that male reproductive material was found the home of the strangled family, and he talks about this in his note, saying that the police probably saw him as a psychotic with a sexual perversion hang-up. Though the note said he would kill again, his next known victim wouldn't be till 3 years later in 1977, in which he would strangle a woman after locking her kids in the bathroom. And then in December of 1977, he would strangle another woman, and this time he called the police to report the killing. A year later, he would send a poem to the newspaper, bragging about the 2 killings and another unknown one. Things would slow down in 1979 because, as I said earlier, he was living a double life. His cover life, I guess as you would call it, needed more attention as he had just graduated from Wichita State University. He would try to kill someone in 1979. It was an elderly woman. This is known because he left a note saying that he was there. He would break into an elderly woman's house and wait for her, and the only reason he didn't kill her is because he would leave before she came back home. Then we have to jump 6 years later for his next known victim. On April 27, 1985, Dennis Rader would end up killing his neighbor and dumping her body on the side of the road, where it would be found 4 days later. Then in 1986, he would kill yet again, and the last known victim of his would be taken from her home on January 19, 1991. On the 30th anniversary of his first killings, the family he strangled, Rader would decide to send evidence to local media outlets and the police in order to taunt them. Now, this was stupid, and thankfully it was stupid because it would lead to him being caught. As the police investigated the evidence he sent out, it would narrow down the suspect list to Dennis Rader, and after obtaining a DNA sample from Dennis Rader's daughter, it would end up being a match for DNA they found at a crime scene. And Dennis Rader would be arrested on February 25, 2005, charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder, and he would end up pleading guilty on June 27, 2005. He would be sentenced to El Dorado Correctional Facility to serve 10 life sentences. Richard Grissom. Grissom was a spree killer who would end up taking the lives of 3 women in the summer of 1989 in the Kansas City area, but that's actually not the first time he had killed. His first victim was in 1977. Just when he was 16 years old, he would end up tying a 72-year-old woman and stabbing her with a railroad spike. For this, he would only get 3 years in Kansas Juvenile Detention Facility and would be released at 19 years old. Now we skip to 1989. He's now 28 years old and out on parole because the previous year he was in prison for burglary and theft. At this point, he was working at a painting job and doing maintenance. The police believed that Richard Grissom picked this job specifically to have access to master keys and apartment complexes. On June 18, 1989, Richard Grissom would take his first victim. A young woman, after a night out, would be returning to her apartment when she wouldn't ever be seen again. But strangely enough, the next day, her ATM card was used to withdraw money from several banks in the area, and her rental car would go missing. It wouldn't be until June 25th when a rental car would be spotted in Lawrence, Kansas by a Lawrence policeman. As the policeman watched the car, he would notice Richard Grissom approaching the car and popping the trunk open. The police would then approach the man, asking for ID, and Grissom would make a break for it, managing to get away. The police would look over this car and would obviously find all the evidence they needed to know that Richard Grissom had abducted the young woman on June 18, 1989. They would also find her blood in the car. That same day, after running away from the police, Grissom would call a friend to take him back to the Kansas City area, and the next day, 2 more women would disappear, both from the same apartment complex, and like the first victim, would have money withdrawn from their accounts. It wouldn't be until 2 days later where a maintenance man for an apartment complex would see Grissom hiding by the stairwell and would attempt to confront him. Grissom would run away, but the police, knowing where he ran away from, started searching the area, but they wouldn't find him. It wouldn't be until 2 weeks later where a woman Grissom had reached out to would tip the police off that he would be showing up at the DFW airport in Texas. And so the police found him and took him in for questioning, asking what happened to the women he kidnapped. Grissom would tell the officers they're not dead, but would later say, well, they probably are by now, only letting the police know that they would not be found in Missouri. There's a specific reason for this. Kansas had gotten rid of the death penalty at this point, but Missouri still had it. So if he buried the bodies in Missouri, he would definitely get the death sentence. But claiming that he didn't would mean he would only get life in prison. The police searched and searched for the bodies, but they would never be found. And in the fall of 1990, Richard Grissom was tried for his killings and would be found guilty and given a life sentence. Clutter family murder, perpetrated by Richard Cox and Perry Smith, two men who both met in prison. Perry Smith would be paroled before Richard and was told not to return to Kansas. In that time that Perry Smith was paroled, Richard Cox would get a new jailmate, Floyd Wells, and mentioned a former employer, Herb Clutter. Floyd Wells would describe this man to Richard as extremely wealthy, and mentioned that Herb Clutter had a safe with at least $10,000 in it. Floyd knew this because he said this is where he was paid from, as well as how Herb Clutter paid for all his bills, using the money from that safe. Well, Richard Cox would tell Floyd Wells that as soon as he's getting out of prison, that him and Perry were going to the Clutter family home and stealing all of that money, as well as killing the family to make sure there was no witnesses left behind. Richard Cox would be paroled on August 13th, 1959, and shortly then after would get a job as a mechanic. While that was happening, he was trying to contact Perry Smith and eventually did get in contact with him, convincing him to come back to Kansas and to help him rob the Clutter family, which is what they would do. On November 14th, 1959, the two would break into the Clutter family home into the night. They would manage not to wake anyone up initially, and went into the room the safe was supposedly in, only to find nothing. Eventually, after an hour of searching, they would wake up Herb Clutter and demand him to show him the safe and take all the money out and give it to them. But Herb Clutter would insist that no safe existed, then told the two trespassers that he would give them all the money he had on him if they just left him and his family alone. So the two intruders would grab Herb Clutter and his son, take him downstairs to the basement, and tie them in separate rooms. Then they would go back upstairs and leave Herb's wife and his daughter tied up in their rooms, the mom in the kitchen and the daughter tied to her bedroom. Once that was done, they would go back down to the basement. This is where Perry Smith would try to goad Richard Cox into killing Herb, but supposedly Richard couldn't do it, so then Perry, using a knife, would slice Herb's throat open and then use that to try to prompt Richard to finish off Herb. But even then, Richard couldn't do it, so Perry Smith would end up shooting Herb Clutter in the head, and so Perry Smith would take out the rest of the Clutter family as well, while Richard helped. In the end, the two would only make off with a portable radio, binoculars, and $50 in cash. But while they were there, they would retrieve the shotgun shells they used to kill, making sure to leave not too much evidence of their crimes. After this, they made their way to Mexico, and after a while, they came back to the US, bouncing around all over the states. It was until they were in Las Vegas, Nevada, that they would be caught, and the only reason they were caught was because they were driving a stolen car from Iowa. Once the Kansas authorities found out they were being held in Las Vegas, they quickly went there and made sure extradited back to Kansas. And the reason the police knew that Perry Smith and Richard Cox were the one who committed the crime was because Floyd Wells, the prison mate, told the police all about their plan. Also, in the car was a bloody boot, which matched a boot print that was at the scene of the crime in the Clutter home. On March 29, 1960, both would be charged with the murders and be sentenced to death by hanging, which occurred on April 14, 1965. Richard Cox would be hung first, and then Perry Smith would shortly follow thereafter. Carl Panzeram. Born in Minnesota to immigrant parents, he was supposedly raised in a very terrible and abusive household. Apparently, the first time he ever got in trouble with the law was at 8 years old for being drunk in the public. There really is just a lot to go over with Carl Panzeram, though most of it is all known from an autobiography he created while in prison, shortly before being hung on September 5th, 1930. It was essentially a bunch of writings, because a prison guard had snuck in a bunch of paper and pencils for him to write, and Panzeram himself would say that this prison guard was basically the first ever nice person he ever met. He would kind of just describe his life as like endless misery, claiming that he was abused and sexually assaulted at a private school he was forced to attend in his teen years because of his attitude issues. Shortly after that, he would leave his home, just becoming a vagrant, traveling everywhere. He would claim to sexually assault many men and children. He would also talk about how he killed them and just essentially brutalized them. He kind of did this all over the states, even at certain points in Africa. One of the things he's really most famous for was stealing from William Howard Taft, which was a president of the United States, the 27th president. He ended up stealing a bunch of jewelry, bonds, and and taps Colt's M1911. And with that gun, he would actually go on a murder spree. He would be caught countless times and be sent to prison, but he would always find a way to get out. It's confirmed that he has 5 kills, but in his autobiography, he confesses to 21, and people kind of suspect that it might be a lot more than that. And again, I'm just like skipping over a lot of this because Panzeram's story is vast and crazy. But the main reason I put him here on the Kansas Iceberg is simply because he was executed in Kansas. So yeah, he was in a federal prison in Leavenworth, Kansas, and that's where he would be executed. Crazy thing is, like, first thing he told the warden was like, if anyone makes me mad, I'm gonna kill him. And then he just genuinely does do that. He even manages to kill a prison employee. When he was first being sentenced to death, a group of like anti-execution people came down and essentially were like, hey, this guy doesn't deserve death. He ends up telling all of them that he would like kill them all without hesitation, and basically ends up telling them that there's no reforming me. He's like, the only way to reform me is to kill me, because if not, he would end up killing them. And yeah, as I said earlier, September 5th, 1930, Carl Panzeram would end up being executed, and the way he was executed was via hanging. The murder of Sandy Bird. So right off the bat, just gonna say this: Los Angeles Times, Who Killed Sandy Bird by Scott Kraft. Article you gotta read if you're interested in this case. The way Scott Kraft wrote this makes for a pretty good read, so you know, that's just my recommendation. Again, as always, a link to a Google Doc with all the sources cited will be in the description of this video. The story starts in 1982 when Sandy and Tom Bird moved from Arkansas to Kansas. This was so that Tom could lead a congregation for the Lutheran Church. The couple of Sandy and Tom would soon meet another couple, Marty and Lorna Anderson. Marty and Lorna Anderson were known to have troubles with their marriage, and it was kind of like a town secret that Lorna was having affairs, and Lorna would even make jokes to her friends about killing her husband and stuff. They first met when Tom Bird hired her as a part-time secretary. She goes on to describe in the article that I mentioned earlier that by 1983, her and Tom were lovers, that Sandy and Tom's marriage was starting to become more and more distant, so they had very little time with each other. So, in the summer of 1983, Sandy Bird and Tom Bird were planning to go out for dinner. She had recently been promoted in her job, and she managed to be able to teach more classes during fall. So she returns around her home at 10:30 to grab drinks for her and her husband. There's a babysitter taking care of their kids, and that night was the last night anyone would see her living. Supposedly, she was run off a gravel country road, and it would be on July 17th that her body would be found, early in the morning by hikers, as she was floating in shallow water. At first, the police believed that she missed a bend in the road, and that her death was an accident. But then something strange would happen 4 months later. Laura and Marty Anderson were in their car, when supposedly, Laura suddenly felt sick, so they had to stop on the side of the road so she could vomit or whatever. And in doing so, she would end up losing her keys in the field they stopped. So she called her husband out to help him search for the keys. Someone with a ski mask would just appear and would end up shooting Marty Anderson 2 times, killing him. Now, they were just kind of on the side of the road in some random place, so people were kind of suspicious almost immediately. Like, you just pulled over and this guy suddenly appears, and suddenly your husband ends up dead after you're having an affair with this other guy whose wife just also died in an accident. Yeah, the investigators weren't really buying that, and so they began investigating and found that there was basically a hit put on Marty Anderson's life, that Lorna Anderson paid a local building contractor $5,000 to kill her husband, and that supposedly this money came from Tom Bird, part of the money he received from his wife's insurance. So Tom Bird and Lorna Anderson would be charged with criminal solicitation, and the person they hired to kill Marty would even claim that Tom said, "I'm a man of God and I'm gonna kill Martin Anderson," but Tom denied that. And obviously the whole killing your lovers to be in a relationship with the person that you had an affair with brought a lot of buzz to this story and a lot of attention to this small town in Kansas. But Tom would kind of deny the affair, saying that all the love he showed was like platonic and Christian love. But that didn't really matter. Both were convicted of solicitation. Laura Anderson would plead guilty, and Bird denied everything, but 5 years later, enough evidence was gathered to charge him with it. Obviously, after all of this went down, a lot of people wanted Sandy's Bird to be re-examined and the whole case to be opened, and that happened. In 1984, she was exhumed, and a forensic pathologist would look at her body, finding that she had been struck in the head with a blunt object and died from a blow to the back. It was a year and a half after Sandy Bird's death that Tom Bird would be charged for killing his wife. Tom Bird would claim that Sandy Bird came to his office after she grabbed the drinks from her house. They both had a bit to drink, kind of just talked to each other and whatnot, and he decided to stay in the office and get ready for the next day's sermon, while Sandy Bird planned to drive to her office, and that was the last he'd seen of her, and that he had expected that she would come and pick him back up. One of the more suspicious things that the police found was that Tom Bird would essentially, after a while, call the police and be like, "Hey, my wife's missing." But then, after calling the police, he would call the babysitter at his house and ask her, "Have you seen my wife?" What they're saying is like, why would you report her missing and then call home if you know she's missing? I'm assuming they're implying that he was making sure that his plan went through all fine and whatnot. Also, from a testimony of a sheriff's officer, when an officer showed up that morning to tell Tom Bird about where they found Sandy Bird's body, it really confused the officer because the first thing Tom basically told him was, "What was she doing out there? We never go there." But then, like, almost immediately, he followed it up with, "Where is it?" So, like, you know, it's kind of weird that he was all like, "Oh my god, we never go there," and then he's like, where even is that? But yeah, basically, like, there's just a lot of circumstantial evidence and Tom Bird acting weird and his affair with Lorna Anderson, and for this he would be convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Francis Donald Nemechek. On December 13th, 1947, on the Interstate Highway 70, west of Hayes, Francis Don Nemechek would shoot out the tire of a traveling car and abduct the occupants of the car. These would be 2 women and a 2-year-old boy. He would then sexually assault both women and shoot both to death. He would then leave the young child all by himself, who would eventually die to exposure and starvation. And then, 2 years later, on June 30th, 1976, he would strike again, this time abducting and killing a 20-year-old who was just riding her bicycle. And lastly, on August 21st, 1976, he would abduct an on-duty rangerette at the Cedar Bluff Reservoir in western Kansas. He would stab her to death. That would be the last time he killed, because people would tie him to the crime scene, and he also would leave evidence in the form of a thumbprint on a CB radio warranty card. He would shortly thereafter be imprisoned, and in February 1977, a jury would find him guilty of first-degree murder in all 5 deaths and sentenced to 5 life prison terms. John Robinson. Known as one of the first serial killers to use the internet to his advantage, he was a known sociopath, stealer, manipulator, and liar, and would use the internet to scam people very early on in the internet's lifespan. John Robinson would make fake companies, fake people, in order to attract vulnerable women. He would make up high-paying jobs and try to get women to come to his hometown, and then when they met, he would make the women disappear and eventually kill them. The first woman he did this to was Paula Godfrey in 1984. She would apply to one of his fake companies called Intellectual Union and told her family all about how she was going to become a sales representative, but then she would disappear, and the family would confront John Robinson about this, but he would claim ignorance. Shortly after being confronted, the family would receive letters from Paula saying that she was okay, and so the police would simply view this as a voluntary disappearance. 3 months later, during December 1984, Robinson would make a fake outreach program in order to help single mothers. He would go to shelters looking for his next victim, and he would find it in a 19-year-old girl and her 4-month-old daughter. When they were last heard and known of, John Robinson had checked them into a hotel, and both were never heard of again. Though while in the hotel, she did call her mother, crying about being forced to sign documents, which she was advised not to do. The victim's family and the director of the shelter the victim was staying at would receive letters thanking them and saying that they were fine. After this, he would kill several more times. In 1987, he would kill a woman by advertising a job where she was told she would be hired, and so she moved into a hotel near where her job would be, and her family would never hear from her again. And then between 1987 and 1993, Robinson would be in prison for several fraud charges, and while at the Western Missouri Correctional Facility, he would meet the prison librarian, who he would start a relationship with, and upon his release, would have her sign her alimony checks to be forwarded to a Kansas post office box. As she had gotten divorced from the prison doctor to be with this guy, she was never heard from again, and Robinson kept cashing the checks as they came in. Around 1994, he would start going into BDSM sites online, under the username Slave Master and would meet several women like this. One of these women, he convinced he was a wealthy businessman and philanthropist and promised to help with her daughter's medical expenses as she was in a wheelchair due to spina bifida. She moved all the way from California to Kansas City and was never heard from again. Robinson would also cash her pension checks for the next 7 years. In 1999, he would meet another woman through BDSM chat rooms and would eventually promise to marry her, gave her an engagement ring, and made her sign a slave contract, in which she basically gave up her rights to him. On the day Robinson and this new woman were going to pick up their marriage license, she was never seen from again. And he would claim that she had been caught smoking marijuana and was deported. Later, in March 2000, a woman would move all the way down from Michigan to Kansas to live with Robinson. He had promised her that they would travel abroad and have all these amazing trips. She would never be heard from again after meeting him, but supposedly she did send her mother letters of Robinson and her describing trips they went to. The issue was that all the letters had Kansas City postmarks, and the mother could tell that the letters weren't even from her daughter. Robinson would later lie and told the mother that she had run off with money from him. The last two people here I mentioned would be found in drums on a farm that Robinson owned. On June 2nd, 2000, Robinson would try to lure a woman to this farm, but instead, he would end up being arrested for sexual battery and theft, and soon the police would be able to connect him to multiple disappearances of women. And so they went to go investigate this farm, and that's where they found the 2 women in the drums. After more investigation, they would find 3 more women in storage units. An autopsy would later reveal that all 3 women found in the storage unit had been killed due to blunt force to the head, and the police believed that Robinson ended up scamming about $1 million from all his victims. Robinson would be given the death sentence for the murder of the 3 women and life sentence without the chance of parole for the murder of the 5 other women. He is currently incarcerated at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. If you made it this far into the video, thanks for watching the whole thing. It really means a lot, and I hope you guys are having a good day or a good rest if you're just listening to this to relax and whatnot. Right, thank you. Goodbye.